Good afternoon. The October 11th, 2022 Board Work Session is now in order. Paul, roll call, please.
Ms. Belford?
Present.
Ms. McDougall?
Present.
Ms. Jenkins?
Present.
Ms. Campbell?
Present.
Mr. Susan?
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Dr. Stephanie Sullivan, Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Leading and Learning, will present our first topic, which is Andrew Jackson Middle School's proposed name retirement. Dr. Sullivan?
Thank you, Ms. Belford, Dr. Mullins, and board members. Appreciate your time this afternoon. Want to introduce Ms. Molly Vega to you. I know many of the board members have worked with her extensively. At the time of this request, Mrs. Vega was the director that oversees Jackson Middle School, hence her involvement. Just to recap some of the information, the materials that I provided to you back in April of 2021, a community member made a formal request for the board to reconsider the name Andrew Jackson Middle School for the school. That board member had previously met with many of the board members, Dr. Mullins in communication, so I formally met with him, and he restated his commitment for the board to consider a name change. According to policy at the time, policy has since changed. The request would commence an 18-month period of community feedback, gathering of information to engage the community in the discussion and to determine the will of the community, and then to be presented to the board. In further discussions with Mr. Gibbs, it was interpreted that that meant for the board to discuss and review and then consider whether the board would like to take it to vote or not. Mr. Gibbs, how'd I do with that? Perfect, thank you. And so in front of you, you'll see the attachments with all the relevant information. Shortly after the meeting, Mrs. Vega developed a website to make all communications transparent. We enjoy our website making abilities in secondary leading and learning, so that everything would be posted. The requester had an opportunity to provide information on his justification, and then it went out, communicated extensively to the Andrew Jackson community and the surrounding environment to be able to submit feedback. Also scheduled 3 formal community meetings at the school with a widespread invitation as well to participate in person and provide additional feedback. And as you can see, those meetings were held on November 2nd, 2021, May 3rd, 2022, and August 24th, 2022. After the 18-month period, here we are today to present the feedback and information. I've provided you a summary of the information at the 3 meetings, along with each of the comments that were provided on the website by community members, sign-in sheets, and other relevant documents pertaining to this request from the last 18 months. And Ms. Vega and I here for any questions that we could answer for you.
Board members have questions for Ms. Vega or Dr. Sullivan? All right, so then I guess we need to discuss as a board what our desire is for going forward. Next step. Anyone want to talk?
I just wanted to make sure, Dr. Sullivan, the vote from the public was like 41 against the name change and 13 or something for it.
Yeah, I'll restate it, especially for our public that may not have the documents in front of them. In the first meeting, there were 4 individuals who attended. 1 participant was in favor and 3 were against it. In the second meeting, 6 individuals were in attendance, all 6 spoke. 1 supported the name change and 5 disagreed. On the third meeting, 2 individuals attended the meeting. 1 was in favor and 1 was against. The website that was also up for 18 months and publicly advertised received 27 comments in favor of the name change and 42 against, with 2 comments I interpreted as neutral.
don't have, it looks like, which is a very small number of people coming out, quite frankly, in our community, unfortunately, are not in favor of it. But I'm wondering, and I don't know if this is the right place, Mr. Gibbs, or not, but you can tell me. I know you would. If we as a board might want to relook at our naming policy of schools to maybe not name schools after people, but like we might think of a new policy, just to throw that out there. So in the future, we don't run into this dilemma where we think somebody had a really great history and then things come to light and not so much. So I'm just thinking out loud that in the future, we may want to look at that policy.
I would like to mention that 7250 was rewritten with the board within the midst of this process.
Dr. Sullivan, some of those people were duplicated, right, between meetings as far as people who spoke. Okay.
Yes.
And
I would suggest there's likely duplication in the online as well, of course.
right, there's a possibility, right. Well, and that's fair. I mean, we didn't ask people to register their name or use an individual IP address. We're doing just, honor system. I agree. I don't know that would consider any of that a vote, but just a general, I am too also disappointed that it didn't have more people participate in the process, especially considering how long it was. But I don't feel like we have a clear directive from the community. I know actually, Duval County, Jacksonville just did renaming of several of their schools a couple years ago. And I talked to Elizabeth Anderson at the retreat, the FSBA Board of Directors retreat last week, to ask her some questions about how they had done the process. The difference, and of course they're larger than we are, one of the differences between the way they do their process and ours is they actually do a formal vote. They have their community come and vote as part of that. And this time, because they were looking at 9 schools to rename, they actually involved their supervisor of elections to make it even more formal. And I think I spoke with you guys before about this. Andrew Jackson was one of the schools that the community spoke very clearly. They did not. They changed all their Confederate named schools, but Andrew Jackson, and then one that was named after an explorer, they left. But I was just asking her about the process, and same thing here. They did not have a very clear thing. So I don't know that we have enough that we would need to move forward with this request for the way I'm looking at it.
Can I follow that? I think we have a pretty good policy where individuals who want to change the name of a school can petition and everything else. Currently, that's what we wrote before. I think that if somebody was wanting to rename it, they could go through that policy that we have. Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. So that's all. Just wanted to make sure the public knew that it's not that this policy shut it all off. It's just a more inline purpose policy that we wrote and all agreed to a couple months ago. So if they wish to rename it, they can go down that line. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Jenkins, anything? Mr. Gibbs, question for you. It sounds like the board is not going to take any action on this at this time. This was under the old policy. So is it, I think it's like 8, did we decide on 8 years before it can be reconsidered? And is that
Off the top of my head, I don't remember.
So would the new policy apply to reconsideration of this request, or would this request fall under the old policy since?
The request was put through the old procedure. The new policy is the new policy. So moving forward, that's where we are. We analyzed it under the old because that's what was in place when it started. So we didn't say we're stopping it because the new policy says you got to have so many signatures to get it analyzed. I would have to go back and review the old policy to determine if it were 8 years.
Okay. But there would be a period of time.
If it's in that policy, since it came under that policy and was challenged under that, then that would be the applicable.
Okay.
The old policy does not have a reference to the time span.
So what you're asking is if someone comes and does what Mr. Susan just suggested, is rather than asking us to reconsider the name, has a new name, and say, hey, I want to rename Andrew Jackson Middle School such and such a name, then are we limited by the time frame? But we
Yeah,
didn't
if-
have the time frame in it, so
Yeah, if there's no time frame,
then it would just,
it would
any
be,
future request would fall under the way we wrote it.
yeah, the current policy. So if they want to challenge now, they'd have to use our current policy.
Oh, they would have to use the current policy.
Yeah, if they want to, if a new person wants to come, if the community, if there's more support moving forward for the name change, they would have to follow the new policy, not the old one.
But they wouldn't be prohibited from, like, say, the board decides today we're not going to do anything on this. They could, under the new policy, go ahead and start that process.
They could, yeah, as long
right
as
away.
there was not a bar, and Dr. Sullivan said there wasn't in the old one. So if there's no bar, they can move forward with attempting to get the signatures needed under the new policy.
So I'll be honest with you guys. I lean toward what Ms. McDougall said, and that is that we probably just need to move away from schools named after people, because people are fallible, right? And there's all kinds of ways that we can find that there are issues. And I do think, I think that there were some really good points made in justification of changing the name of the school. I do think that there are some very concerning things in the history that make it questionable as to whether or not we should be celebrating this individual with the school being named after them. But at the same time, I think it's clear that we don't have significant input or board support to move forward with changing a name. So I would just say to those community members that feel passionate about this, the opportunity is still there to try to get more input and move this forward if it's something of significant concern.
Can I just say, so I hear you on not naming it after a person. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it may not be this policy, it may be a different one when it has to do with naming, but isn't there a caveat where not to name it after somebody who's still living as well, to try and avoid it? I mean, I know this didn't happen then either,
Right.
but to try and avoid that as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ms. Balfour, just for clarification, and I will let the petitioner know the outcome, and certainly let the petitioner know the new policy if they have any interest in pursuing that.
Super, thank you.
It's
5 years under the new one.
under the new one.
All right, anything else on that topic? Thank you, Dr. Sullivan and Ms. Vega. We appreciate you. The next topic is the proposed attendance boundary change, Southwest Middle to Stone Magnet Middle. Sue Han, Assistant Superintendent of Facilities, will be presenting. Ms. Han?
Good afternoon, everyone. Just very briefly, this came up after we had our previous workshop and discussed a few cleanup boundary changes in the Vieira area. This is an area that is in far south Brevard. It's kind of on the north side of Barefoot Bay, and it's right on the boundary between Stone and Southwest. We realized that there were some homes built within this red rectangle. This is the first part of a very large subdivision called Crystal Bay. So the remainder of the subdivision is to the north of that red box in the boundary for Stone. And we looked at potentially trying to change the boundaries for this section of the community. You can see the line as it stands now cuts right through lots, and so we need to adjust the boundary. There is one entrance to this subdivision. Where it stands right now is that there are homes under construction within the red box area, and so we wanted to get ahead of this before another year went by. So our goal is to really catch up to the process that we have underway for the cleanup changes in the Vieira area. There are 7 students within the red box. 4 of them attend Sunrise Elementary, 2 attend West Shore, 1 attend Bayside. So it doesn't affect any middle school students, but it does affect families with elementary students. So I think our goal would be to reach out to those families as part of the public involvement process and just let them know what the proposal is. So our suggestion is to rezone this red rectangle from Southwest Middle School to Stone Magnet Middle School. I just wanted to put up here for your reference, this is a map that shows the planned developments that are within the South Brevard area. And you can see that Southwest is slated to take on a number of new developments. And so that is part of our recommendation as to why we're looking at rezoning those students from Southwest to Stone.
Anyone have any questions, comments? Ms. Campbell?
Thank you for providing this map, because I know when I first read this, I was thinking, okay, but when we look at the future, the data, it looks like Stone is the one that's going to be over 100% faster, but then with these new developments, that's a whole change. Do you see, as far as the way that it's laid out, I mean, there look like smaller red boxes on this map, but the potential for the growth of Stones continuing to be slower than the potential for Southwest?
That would be my guess,
Okay.
that there's more existing development within the Stone boundary than there is within the Southwest boundary. There's a lot of developable property in the Southwest boundary. So kind of in the vicinity, the interchange in that area would be my biggest concern.
And Emerald Lakes, if and when it ever happens, it's kind of splits that highway. I can't really tell from where it is sitting right here. I mean, I see the Emerald Lakes on the west side of I-95, but is some
Correct.
of that also on the Stone, in the Stone boundary?
There is some, I believe, development potential on the east side. This map reflects only developments that have come through our process where they have asked for a concurrency letter.
Okay. But we can always adjust in the future, but,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else? All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Ham. All right, the next 9 items on today's agenda are policies for board discussion and/or suggested revisions. There are no public comments for these policies today. The public will have an opportunity to address each of these policies at the October 25th work session when they are brought forward for rule development and public hearing. We are going to begin with Board Policy 2410, School Health Services.
Good. Is it afternoon at this point? Good afternoon. All of these policies are in relation, most of these policies are in relation to this current legislative session. Those rules came down. Most of them were to be implemented on July 1st. We've already changed processes and procedures and made all of the changes programmatically to ensure we're in line. And what follows is some language from Neola to get our policies in line. So that's why there's so many of them. They're in response to legislation. So 2410 is school health services. Specific revisions include notification to parents and legal guardians of each healthcare service offered at their student's school and the option to withhold consent. It also included the language of the COVID-19 prohibitions and guidelines for contracting with mental health service providers, which include a timeline for assessment after referral and a timeline for service after the assessment. Parents and legal guardians, as well as other individuals living in the household with a student receiving services, will also receive information about other behavioral health services available through the school and local community-based behavior health resource providers. You guys have already seen that resource manual for our families. And all of the proposals for this do encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Any board members have any questions or comments on policy 2410?
I had a really quick one.
Ms. Campbell?
And I already asked all my questions to Ms. Moore, but I wanted to just make sure we had this discussion on the new D. Why are you laughing? We just got started. On the new D, where it says on involuntary examination of students, I had brought up last February, and you said you had forgotten that was our suggestion, that we added the mental health. So can we put that back in? I just felt like the policy is all health, 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 health. And then we talk about involuntary examinations. Yeah. I don't want anybody's bells and whistles to go off. We're talking about the Baker Act procedure type thing. So if we can put mental health back in there, there's no objection. There's no legal reason why we can't do that, right, Paul?
No.
Okay. That would be my suggestion, that we put that back in.
Yep. Anything else? All right. The next is going to be Board Policy 2416, Student Privacy and Parental Access to Information.
So specific revisions in this policy include providing the questionnaire or form to the parent and obtaining permission prior to administering a student well-being questionnaire or health screening to a student in kindergarten through 3rd grade. This includes an SRI K through 3 if needed. The proposed revisions do encompass suggested language from Neola.
Answer questions from board members? Yes, go ahead.
All right, so, and actually, I already have forgotten what you put in the email, so many emails. On the new D in this one, where the student well-being questionnaire, that would be like that's a mental health questionnaire, right? Like the SRI?
It could be several things, but the one thing that's most commonly considered under D, the well-being or health screening questionnaire, that we were I don't want to say concerned about, but that we were questioning was whether or not it does include the SRI. We worked closely with Mr. Gibbs to look at the legal language, the legal standing, the legal, what other districts around the state were doing, and landed on that it did include that. So if a K through third grade student needed a suicide risk inventory, that's what an SRI is. Number one, we would need parent permission before we did it. Number two, they'd have to have access to that form. We worked with the publisher of our questionnaire, and they've given us carte blanche to put it on our website so parents could have easy, ready access to it. So any other form that would be considered there, it's not exclusive to the SRI, but that's the one that we thought would have the most questions.
The reason I asked was because when I looked at the terminology there, I'm like, do we have something that is either one of those three things? Now, the health screening form, would that be considered the form that, if you're coming in as a new student or a kindergarten that you have to take to your doctor and get them to fill out? Is that considered that, or what would that be?
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say the health screening form, the parent owns that process. They go to the doctor, they bring it back and forth. That's not a form we do.
Right.
That's
Department of Health anyway.
That's
right?
Department of Health. It could be any form that we give that asks questions about a student's health or personal mental health history or mental health history of a family member. I can't come up with an example that we use readily other than the SRI. The one example I do have, besides the SRI, is when we do threat assessments. As part of the threat assessment, if a student has a very serious substantive threat, meaning the team has come together and determined that the threat involves the use of a weapon, and it involves a threat to hurt or harm somebody, that part of that assessment statutorily is that there's a mental wellness assessment for that student. And that is the one example we could come up with where statute says we don't need to get parent permission as part of the threat assessment process, because by statute we have to do it.
Right. No, thank you for making that clear. And then I had asked you a question about how this would apply to our Youth Truth Survey or the former CDC Risk Behavior Survey that now we don't have any longer. The state's going to make up their own. And I heard this last weekend that they're not moving very fast and getting it done. But you said it would apply to those. It would have to apply this test, but that the Youth Truth Survey doesn't ask questions about the things that are listed in A 1 through 8. Correct? About religious practices and affiliation, sexual behavior and attitudes. That the CDC.
That was the CDC, yeah.
They did. So let me just put this hypothetical out. In that case of like the CDC questionnaire, this policy would require us to do the opt-in, which is the way that we had practiced it for most of the years.
Correct. If we were still doing the youth risk behavior survey, then we would absolutely have to post it online, have parents be able to view it, and opt their children into taking it. Any survey we do, this is the standard that we have to look at, A 1 through 8. If it contains questions on any of those things, we must post it. We must give parents the ability to view it and the ability to opt their child into it.
Even if it's an anonymous survey like the CDC risk.
Even if it's an anonymous survey, yes.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Just a couple of follow-up, just more. Aren't we required to do SRIs?
So we are, however, we have to get parent permission to complete them K through 3 based on this statute. And so we would have to work with the parent to get the student to health services. I will be frank, I'm gonna punt this one back to Paul because he's done the majority of the research on whether we have to use this language for SRIs for K through 3. This went back and forth a lot.
So there's no conflicting statute that requires us to do an SRI for student safety?
There's going to be conflicts, and there's no guidance, obviously, because it's brand new. So there's nothing defining what it is, and districts are just kind of all over the place on does it or doesn't it. I wasn't prepared to say that asking kids about suicide isn't going to be deemed a mental health questionnaire. So you're risking being in direct conflict with this versus working with parents to try and get the child the same information done that way. And the company was fine with us posting and allowing them to see it in advance anyways. So since they didn't, there was no objection to us providing it in advance. I thought that was the better play than risking lawsuits over not getting permission.
Got it. Okay. And then my other question, and this may be punted back to Paul as well, I don't know, but on the health screening form with vaccine records, that, you know, the form that we turn in saying our kids had their physical and they have all their vaccines, we have to have parent permission for that. So does that mean that a parent can now choose not to submit that?
So that's a different get about registration where that's required by the state of Florida unless a parent goes through a process to get a waiver on that, and there's a whole process for that. But there are statutes in conflict with statutes, but we stick with the registration statute. These are the mandatory requirements you have before you can enter one of our public schools.
Okay. Yeah.
I will, if I could just add to the conversation about the K through 3 SRI. Best case scenario for us is that, you know, it's hard to have these conversations with a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, and why are you, you know, what are you feeling and how are you feeling, and trying to get to those questions. The best case scenario is to have a supportive parent sitting there alongside us. So in my best dreams, this is a good thing for our little ones. And then I of course have my own concerns, and when we come to those bridges, we'll be crossing them and making the best decisions we can for the safety of our kids. Welcome.
Quick, you may not know this off the top of your head. So K through 3, typically, how many do we have in a year?
I don't know.
No, and that's what I'm sorry, I didn't even think about that, but I was just.
It's a very low number. I will tell you that, you know, we hit a high in 5, 6, and then we hit a high again in 8. Right. But it's very low. But I can get you those exact numbers.
I was just curious because I'd be surprised if it was a high number.
Yeah, it's a low number.
We have it last year. Find it, dig back in the annals of emails, but
I have to look. Sure, it's filed underneath one of my folders. Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Oh, Ms. Jenkins?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just, I don't really know if this is going to lead to a question or not, but just kind of jumping off of that SRI. So when you brought that up, one of my thoughts and concerns was, yes, this is in conflict because we are mandated to do these things if these children show these tendencies. And then I do think of those other scenarios where potentially that student doesn't have a supportive system at home. It does concern me a little bit that they're privy to the information and questions beforehand for coaching and stuff, you know, kind of ruins the validity of that assessment. It would be an extreme case, and it would be really, really rare to happen. But it's just something that we need to be aware of, and hopefully the state will be aware of some of the implications and some of the negative impact of some of these decisions that they're making, just so that we don't negatively impact some of our students who don't have that support system at home. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Ms. Moore, can you give me an example of a survey that the term personal information means individual identified information, including a student, parents, you know, first, last name, all that stuff. Can you give me an example of one that we do require to get that, and that we do then send that information to a third party? Because part of the fear out there among a lot of parents, and I'll be honest with you, I've heard it from them, is that our information is being used for different things. I'm in sales. it does make its way into it, right? People with their Bluetooths on their phones and everything else, right now, it's going. So from our perspective, is there a survey that you can think of that actually does this?
I can't think of a specific survey. I'll be frank, as I was reading this, my bigger concern is, we have a lot of teachers, we have a lot of things that go home, and just making all of our people aware that if it's a survey, if it's asking personal questions, if it's addressing any of these things, it's against policy if we haven't done the work right. So I can't particularly think, my group doesn't send out too many surveys. I can't particularly think of one. I wish I could. I'm more concerned kind of broader, making sure all of our employees are aware of this policy and that we're following the policy and something's not going to slip through the cracks.
Sure. So help me here understand. So when we go to fill out the registration form, it asks for vaccination data and stuff like that. That information is then inputted into our AS400 because we have to administer that in the event that we have an issue at some of the schools. Where does that information, is that ever given to any other third parties?
I don't know of a single instance where health information is given to a third party.
Good. And this is just for verification. I'm not asking you because I'm getting somewhere. I'm just verifying.
Yeah.
Anything that has to do with HIPAA or anything of that nature, nobody can come in and make a public records request for personal data to include vaccination statuses and all that other stuff.
That would go through the department. We do have people that go through the Department of Health, like our news media asks, how many kids are vaccinated for chickenpox. We don't give names, we don't give any, we don't even give schools,
Right.
but we would give numbers. That's the only instance I can think of where we're asked for health information, and typically we direct them right to the health department because they're the agency that owns that information. Did I answer your question? I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
absolutely. So we fill out the vaccination forms for each one of the schools and all that stuff, and then that information is then transported over with names to the health department? Or is that information then kept here and we just do numbers, percentages? This is how many kids are vaccinated here, chicken pox, all that other stuff, correct?
Yes, that was a lot, but the health department owns that information, so they have the information there. The parents turn it into us, and it gets put in the records at our, it gets put into Focus, so we have a lot of that information digitally, and it also gets included in the information that we keep in our registration. So it is a piece of paper within our registration cumulative folders that our students have.
So the Department of Health, do they have names of individuals who have vaccinations and don't have vaccinations?
Yes.
Okay, and can we verify, and this might be the follow-up that I need, is there a way to verify that the Department of Health does not allow that information to go anywhere else? Does that make sense?
The question makes sense. I mean, it's a government agency. They would have to follow HIPAA rules.
No, I know, but
Yeah.
it's coming from our schools, right? So our schools are submitting this data to the Department of Health. The Department of Health then has this data, and it's a fair question to ask the Department of Health, who out of a third party would need reference to this? And are we, they are following HIPAA, I get it, but there's a fear out there that some of this information might make its way out, and I think that it behooves us just to ask them if there's any third parties that monitor it, have an opportunity to come in and see it, and I think the answer to that would be no, but I think it might be worth it for us just to ask. That's all.
Yeah, I understand. I actually think, I'm going to verify, but the information actually starts with the Department of Health. The Department of Health has all the original records. What's brought to us is a copy, so we're getting a copy of information data that
Sure.
they already own.
Yep.
I will absolutely ask that
But
question.
just to verify,
Yeah.
it kind of circles up our information
Sure.
for our kids and kind of follows the trail of the sentiment of what this policy is trying to do. So thank you. I
Yeah,
appreciate
you
it.
bet.
That's all. Thank you.
Can I just follow up real quick? So when we go to the doctor, we get vaccines, whatever information is presented there, anything that takes place, that is already in the system of the
Goes to
Department of
Florida
Health.
shots.
That's
Yeah.
right. That is protected under HIPAA. There's nothing that can be disseminated there without consent of the patient or the patient's parent. When that information comes to us, it is protected under FERPA if it becomes part of their educational record. So there's actually 2 layers of protection there for privacy. We have no right legally to give out anybody's name or identifying information, so that absolutely wouldn't be happening. nor does the Department of Health, especially when it comes to vaccinations and stuff like that. So again, when you register your student, you're the one providing the information to the school system. We're not providing that to the Department of Health. They're giving that to us. That's for our data. We don't send that to anybody.
Can I follow up with that? I just wanted to say, although I appreciate what the rules and regulations of the world are, and I appreciate that overview of what you did, Ms. Jenkins, it behooves us to just ask, to circle it up, and to make sure. Because there are many data points that I see in different areas through hospital systems and everything else that if they are sent the wrong people, it might get to the wrong areas. And I just want to make sure as an elected official that the things that we have inside of our control are not being used. That's all. And if everything that you said, which is correct with the policies and procedures under HIPAA, FERPA, and everything else is true, then this is not a problem and we can ask the question. That's all. Thank you.
I would suggest the best way to verify that, Mr. Susan, would be to just put in a public records request and see if they'll give you the information, because Ms. Moore is going to speak to one person at the health department who's going to say, no, this is what the, you see what I mean? Like, it tests the system and see if it works.
We could go both ways. I mean, she could reach out and ask them if there's any third-party vendors, and then she can send that. That's public record unto itself. And then I could go out and do that. That's great. But verifying from them through you is sufficient for me. That's all I wanted.
Okay.
But thank you for the idea.
Anything else on 2416? Okay. Moving then along to policy 2431, interscholastic athletics.
The proposed revisions encompass suggested language from Neola. Particular areas of revision include the following: a mandated amount of players for middle school basketball teams. It's actually, if I could explain, the old policy had an A team and a B team, and they needed 5 students on the A team and the B team, and we began having middle schools that couldn't field 10 players, and so they couldn't have an A team and a B team, and we were forcing them out of policy by not doing that. So instead, we wrote that each player had to play at least 1 quarter, following the philosophy that middle school kids are about getting experience, but allowing them to stay within policy.
Questions on policy 2431, interscholastic athletics?
I have a bunch.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that's inside there is it says that we're not allowed to allow middle school teams to go play outside the county. Many of you may not know this, but years ago, middle school had a full boat of athletics. They had even football in some middle schools, and we did compete outside the county. Ms. Moore, can you give the justification for not playing outside the county or allowing other counties to come bring their teams here?
I believe the time, I could be wrong because I wasn't prepared for the question,
Yeah.
but I believe when you're talking about is when we had junior high schools and we had 9th grade teams. And when we had 9th grade teams, we did play outside the county, and we did play a roster of other sports. Since I'm aware, but I could be wrong, middle school has followed this philosophy.
So we did have an entire full boat years ago. And there was a point, and I forget what point in early 2000, that we stripped a lot of the programs out. As a coach in 9th grade, even if we were junior or not junior, senior, we actually traveled outside of the county to play those sports back in the day. So when I was coaching, we were at Space Coast, but we also, many of the other teams that didn't have the junior, senior logo. I personally I don't see what the reason behind it is. Like, why would we not allow kids from South area? And I'll tell you why. Not only for we sometimes have difficulty fielding teams in our sports, okay? So the middle school, we're going to go ahead and say, let's start having the volleyball, let's start having all these other sports, and there's not going to be all the schools that actually have those sports inside of them. So the interleague play is going to be limited to only a certain number of teams. So you're going to end up playing the same team over and over again. So what I would like to do is remove the not allowing outside counties to come play so that we can have more competition for our students. And I looked at some of the surrounding counties. This is not a requirement inside the middle schools for them. So it's kind of a Brevard thing. And I was wondering, if there's a true justification for it, which maybe I'm missing, I would just love to hear it, because I can understand travel, but not allowing them to not bring a team in and raise money and all that other stuff, is something I would like to look at. So, but I did want to ask you if there's a reason behind it.
I can go back to when this originally all happened, and I can pull the conversations and try to get you an answer.
Well, I mean, look, we can go back and we can do that. But right now, we have students that are in middle schools that may not have enough interscholastic activities against other teams based on the sport, and we're going to inhibit them based on not being able to go outside the county. That's the first one. The second one is that as we look at this and we're starting to try to create a more athletically driven district, then not being able to play outside the county doesn't allow for a lot of that level of play to increase. Does that make sense to you? So if I'm a really good middle school team, I should be able to go challenge people outside my county. I should. And we're not allowing that. Like right now, our high school teams are playing in Allentown, Texas for football, and our wrestling team goes to Georgia, Alabama. We just supported that last board meeting. So I would like to see that we allow our middle schools to allow teams to come in from outside the county and for us to travel outside the county if they can raise the funds for it. That's all.
Yeah, I would like the opportunity to go back and look at why some of those decisions were made, so I could see if they were, financial or philosophical, or if it had to do with ninth grade moving up to high school and the eighth grade not being able to field that kind of competitive teams. I just would like the opportunity to do a little research.
That's fine. All right, and then the next one is a minimum of 1 quarter. It drove me crazy that we had the A-B games in the 7th grades, because you're right, like teams were trying to field, and there was more about the strategy of who was going to play where rather than coaching them on what what the actual sport was. It became a large piece. So I appreciate you going the extra distance to create it to where they play 1 quarter. But it still is inside of there. What is the justification for, and I think it's going to be the so everybody can play mentality, but is the reason that we're maximizing that every player must play minimum of 1 quarter is because we want them to get access to the program? Is that what it is? And have the opportunity to play? Is that what it?
Yes.
Okay. So if we are having intramural sports that are coming on to include other sports so that they can play, would that become a issue? So say like AAU had basketball intramurals and they were allowing everybody to play, right? So you have your middle school basketball team, middle school volleyball team, middle school all that. This is your best team that you put forward. These are the kids that are going to go compete. These are the ones, right? But then you also have a robust intramural play where everybody can play, because I truly believe and I love the fact that we want to make kids play. I do, right? I do. I would love to expand it more. I think it just comes at the inhibition of creating this other piece, which is intramural play for the same ones. So for instance, if we have basketball at a school, right? The whole school should be able to play basketball. Currently, under this, there's only a certain number of kids. And I'll be honest with you, many kids that would love to just go out and play it don't get the opportunity to play because they're like, man, I'm not good enough to go play on that team. They really are. And there's only so many seats. So if we expand the intramurals to allow many teams to play in kind of a 1 week or whatever those intramurals are, right? Then this inhibits them. I don't know if it's needed. Does that make sense? Absolutely, go.
I'm confused.
Yep.
So are you agreeing that it's okay that everybody?
No, I want to take it, I want to
guess-
take it out and expand intramurals to allow all the children who normally would love to play that sport, who are just kind of trying to find their way onto a team to play, give them the opportunity to shine in an intramural setting.
So you're saying that not a need for tryouts?
No.
So I'm confused, Mr.
Absolutely. So here's what you have. You have two things. You have the middle school basketball team, the middle school volleyball team, that's your 7th and 8th graders trying out for a team that is competitive, that will go compete against other schools and other counties. Okay?
Yeah.
Then you have, so they take that, set it aside. Then you have an intramural program, kind of like what we're trying to do with inside of the schools. So like you have 20 basketball teams that play intramurals inside the schools. And then that way everybody can play. Because I'll be honest with you, I would love to see children that are absolutely no athletic ability running out there to play basketball, because it's one of the greatest things to see them get involved like that, right? But I don't want to inhibit a basketball team from winning against other schools because they have to play everybody on the bench, if that makes sense. And at middle school mentality, you're talking about kids, you're not talking about elementary school students. You're not talking about those students with that. You're talking about students who, if you've been around the middle schoolers, that is not a place where, I mean, they are becoming young adults. And I don't know if that fits there. That's all. I wanted to throw it out there.
So currently, just to kind of encapsulate, we have 2 sports at the middle school that are intramural. They compete with other schools, basketball and track. And this year, we are adding 2 intramural sports, volleyball and soccer. And so we're just adding it. We're not sure how that's going to go and how many kids are going to come out and whether we're going to get support from the faculty to run those. So just to make sure the public knows, I know you know, just to make sure the public knows what's going on at middle school. And for as long as I've been in the system, the philosophy at middle school has been to get kids out there, give kids playing time, give them the experience of being on that competition team. I hear what you're saying. Depends on the will of the board.
Yeah, I would, if I may, I believe that the current policy comes in response and as a reflection of what our district's philosophy of middle school athletics is compared to secondary athletics. And the philosophy embraces participation, but also competition, and try to balances those out so that, yes, there's tryouts, and there are, let's be honest, tears when students don't see their name on the list at the end of tryouts at middle school, yet those who do make the list are assured some playing time opportunity. In our high schools, in interscholastic, I've had a loss of...
Interclass, yeah.
Yeah, the sports, there's not only tryouts, but there's never an assurance that any one player is going to receive playing time. So it's just trying to balance the philosophy. I understand, Mr. Susan, your interest in expanding access to those sports activities at the middle school level, and we agree and know that adds one more venue of connectedness to our school environment. And we'll certainly pursue those as much as we can. But like Ms. Moore said, we're not guaranteed that any school is going to have those. So that would become difficult when talking about board policy as a middle school sports program as a whole, when the intramural, assurances aren't there for everything. So,
So,
jump in? Katie, you have a...
yeah, so I totally understand what you're talking about when you talk about these middle school teams, because, the largest middle school in the county is in District 5, actually the largest 2. We could take 4 of the middle schools in other parts of the county and put it inside of Central. If we take the smallest middle schools. So for the students who are there, and Central still only has 1 boys team and 1 girls team. So even though they have 1,200 students, 600 boys, 600 girls, only however many, 10, 12 boys and girls are going to make that team because 7th and 8th grade are combined. So if you're trying out for basketball, and this hits personal in my own household, at that school, you're going to be at a disadvantage because there's just a larger pool to draw from. Whereas if, those kids were at a smaller school, they might have a better chance to make the team. So I understand that. And so those students, if they want a chance to play, they do have to look for AAU or community or the countywide things. I just personally am in favor of leaving this in. I agree that I was glad that we made the adjustment of the AB. I'm not even sure how some schools were even able to make that happen. But this guarantees some time in this training ground that is sports. We don't have intramural basketball right now. And I like the idea of opening it up. But I personally would also like to see how things take off with the intramural soccer, with the intramural volleyball, if we have the capacity to do it. And, and some schools may, a big, huge school like Central, who has more teachers also as well as more students, may take off more inside their own school. We'd have the opportunity to do that more there. I don't know that's necessarily needed countywide, because some of our little tiny, what are some of yours, middle schools, they're probably doing all they can, some years to field a full boys and girls team. I'm also, unless we have, I haven't really heard anybody ask about the out-of-county play for middle school. I just don't know what the need is that. I mean, I know they have divisions south and north. They're not even divided by size like the high schoolers are in divisions. So they seem to be having enough competition. They're having a regular rotation, and then of course they have got the playoffs. They've got the playoffs at the end of the season, and the district track meets and things like that. Seem to be pretty large. In fact, don't we have 2 district track meets when we get there? We have like a south and a north or whatever. I'm trying to think if all the schools are there at the same time. Maybe not.
Watch me have to turn to Stephanie Sullivan, because I think the answer is yes, but I know she's going to have the answer.
Yes, there's 2. So that's how many middle schools we have. We actually are dividing the district track meet at the end of the season into 2 different tracks because we can't hold them all. So I'm not sure that we have the need for that to take that out. And of course, if the need develops, we can come back and revise this policy.
Can I ask a question? Ms. Moore, just for a reminder and for the public that's listening, I know your name is on this, but can you just let us know who you communicate with in order to redraft these policies? Did you sit down and write this policy by yourself? Who did you have a conversation with?
No, it was Andrew Ramjet is our assistant director of athletics. When it came to the middle school piece, I had him working with the middle school athletic directors to say, what works, what doesn't work, what's your issues, what's your problems, what are you looking toward. So we had some feedback.
Okay, thanks. So I really, I love it that we have it in there that every student plays at least a quarter, because we're talking middle school here. We are not secondary high school where it's so competitive. And I'm much rather have these students have the ability to go ahead and play, whether I'm great or not so great, and not feel sitting on the bench all the time. At this level, at this point in their athletic, I don't want to say career, but
Could be.
but it could be.
Yeah.
I love it. So thank you for putting in there. I think it's really important to have that in there. I think everybody in 7th and 8th grade should have the ability, if they want to play in a quarter, not just sit on the bench. So yes, thank you.
So, Ms. Moore, could you do me a favor, since I think Mr. Gibbs or Chairperson Belford, moving forward, this policy comes before us now, because there's a lot more here. The other thing is that if it needs to be changed, we would take a look at some of the things that we're going to be bringing up and then bring that back to a workshop. Would that be the next step? Are we okay with that?
I want to make sure I understand what you're asking. Are you asking about changing?
What recommendations are on this policy right now, making changes to that? What would that do in the process of this actual?
If changed right now, it just comes through its normal process because we've advertised. That's why we have this one, so the board can make any recommended changes without having to start the process over. If the first hearing, the next meeting, October 25th, there's any changes at that point, we start over. So we have to re-advertise and put it on a new schedule.
The next time would be the same, and then the next time and stuff like that. Okay, yeah, that's fine. And then you have 3 from that, so October 25th, and then.
Well, October 25th will be the first public hearing.
Right.
November 22nd will be when it's finalized.
No, this one's
Oh,
going on 12.
This one's, yeah, there's
Yeah,
no.
it would be the 12,
12,
13. That's another thing that a lot of people were emailing us about is that they were worried that this is the first time and the only time these policies are going to come forward. They're going to be,
There's
fear that the new
public
board-
hearing number 1 is next meeting, and then the December meeting is the finalized.
Perfect. So in the meantime, if you can ask each one of those basketball coaches, not the ADs, the coaches, ask them, would you love to compete outside of this county? And I'll tell you, the Southwests, they will. Those other organizations probably will. And the reason is that if I'm fielding a team and I want the maximum competition for them, and I've got a good team, I want to travel outside. Now, the ones who don't have to. You're not trying to set up a situation where they're forced to play outside the county. Teams that are currently here look for teams outside the county to play so that they can win some. There's another opportunity to go outside the county and give the kids better experiences and to learn better as far as the sports. One of the problems we have as a school district is that our children, when they come to high school playing, other school districts have robust athletic programs that puts our students at a disadvantage when they start playing at high school because we are not training them and working them ahead of time. One of the other issues that we have inside of our sports programs inside this county is that many of the low-income students are not allowed to, many of the students that are low income don't have the opportunity to play because there's not as many opportunities to get out there. So right now, my daughter plays on a soccer team. Costs an extraordinary amount of money to play on that soccer team. That is an inhibitive towards many of the other kids in the district. When the school district doesn't offer the same athletics that it has in the past years ago, those children don't get the opportunity until high school to actually play, which puts us at a disadvantage in the competitive sports. I just wanted to make that statement. If you can ask each one of the coaches what their opinion is, and then make that as part of the feedback, because a lot of times we ask, well, what do you think? But it doesn't actually get to them. And for me, it would be my request. They may not take it as a change in the policy, but it would mean the world to me if we could ask each one of the coaches, would they like to play outside the county? Okay?
Ms. Belford, if I may, we can certainly do that, and if the board is interested in moving towards that consideration, there's a couple other factors that may weigh in. One, maybe out of our control, but just to add it to the discussion, is that other districts may be FHSAA approved middle school sports athletics where we're not. That doesn't mean we couldn't be or couldn't consider what that would look like, but that could be a barrier for competing out with schools out of county. If the board wants to move in that direction, I would just add there needs to be an equity conversation, and we would likely, I would not recommend we just open it up to compete with other schools outside of the county without setting some guidelines and the potential and likely funding impacts, because there are some middle schools who may be able to raise dollars to go travel and reciprocate playing out of county, and other middle schools couldn't, and we certainly wouldn't want to allow that to happen to ensure that all of our students have access to those equal opportunities. So that's just, some additional perspective that we would need to take into consideration as this conversation continues. And we're happy to do that if that's the direction of the majority of the board.
I think, and it's part of a larger conversation, is that what Dr. Mullins had just alluded to. Thank you for that, Dr. Mullins. And everything that you said is 100% in line with what needs to be done. The issue is this. Other school districts allow their middle schools to compete in FHSAs. We don't. We tell them, you got to, we had this policy where you had A and B and we had all this other stuff. We have this intramural thing and all that stuff. And then the kids get to high school and we are 9th and 10th grade catching up. And our 9th and 10th grade programs have been decimated over the last couple of years because of the participation based on it. If we have opportunities in middle school for students to be playing, then they would transfer to being more participation in high school, and they would be more prepared to play those games. And maybe the conversation is to ask the coaches, instead of that, would they like to join the FHSAA and compete in FHSAA sports, rather than being an anomaly out there that doesn't do that?
So just for clarification, typically when we're seeking feedback, and I appreciate that you get to the people who know their part the best, we seek feedback from our athletic directors and our principals because they have the umbrella. They have the overall picture of what's going on in the school and how the impact of one thing could impact many other things, unlike a single viewpoint person. But I appreciate it's important for us to understand how individuals feel about their passion, their sport. As we look at if we're going to move forward, if we're going to investigate, I'm going to need some clear direction on what we're investigating, whether we're investigating changing how our middle schools play, or whether we're investigating whether middle schools are going to join FHSAA. It's not going to be a quick answer because there's And we're going to have to do an analysis of everything that impacts. The board also already makes a sizable contribution to keep our athletics afloat in secondary, in high schools. So we're just going to need a little bit of time and a clear vision of where you guys want me to look at making changes for middle school sports.
If I may, and then I'll turn it back to the board. I apologize. Thank you, Ms. Moore. I should have concluded my comments with exactly that, and just advise the board that typically when we pursue a philosophical shift, change, or considerable change in our district practice or our function, which we do regularly, we review and analyze, there is a period of time we take that on and we do a comprehensive evaluation and then bring back the information, the proposal, and in some cases even a recommendation of what that would look like. So in this case, this is sounding to be a considerable reconsideration of the philosophy of Brevard Public Schools middle school athletics. That's not wrong. It's not a bad thing. It's obviously been a long time since we have evaluated that. But if that is the direction of the board, then I would suggest we need some time. We're virtually halfway through the sports season of middle school, where basketball is essentially, if it isn't over, it's got to be coming close.
Not over yet.
Okay. And track isn't until the spring. But we're talking a little bit more about basketball as an impacted sport than track. So I would echo Mrs. Moore and her comments there that we need some time to get comprehensive feedback, look at the potential cost implications, supplements, and those types of things as well, and make a presentation to the board.
If I could say that we don't need the will of the board, I would just like 2 questions to be asked to both the athletic directors and the coaches. Would you like to join FHSAA? And would you like to play outside the county? The will of the board doesn't matter for me to just request our athletic directors and our coaches to do that. I don't want to create change, create all this grandiose things. I just want to know if from the heart of those coaches that they'd like to compete in that. That's the first thing. So I'm not asking for the will of the board. I'm just asking for those questions to be answered. The other issue is that this policy doesn't fit. So it says all 7th and 8th grade year students in uniform must play a minimum of 1 quarter. Many of our sports are not divided into quarters. The track is not a quarter. The volleyball is not a quarter. So that policy unto itself needs to be reworded to just say something like everybody should play if that's the will of the board.
When they took out the middle school basketball,
Right.
that made it not.
Right. But in unto itself in the other side, it was only written for basketball, right? And there's so I would say just take a look at that before it comes back on the 25th. And then I can move to the next one.
Next policy or the next?
No, next issue. I've got about 9.
Before you get off of this one, I know you put your request in. I would suggest that before we ask Ms. Moore to go and track down 20 coaches, that's something that we could do as board members too. But if it's not the will of the board to make that change at this time in this policy where we have it in front of us, or then I wouldn't necessarily want to put that on her. I do think if you're bringing up the basketball thing, that seems big. The other thing is, if we're talking about FHSAA, we're in the middle of this reimagining middle school process. Yeah, sorry, I stole your thunder.
You're good. I'm glad.
And I was thinking, so right now, we're not only going to have the opportunity to hear from coaches, we're going to hear from parents, and we've been hearing from staff. What does middle school in Brevard need to look like? And I would suggest that as we're doing that, we're going to hear from our community, hey, you know what, we think our middle schools need to be more sports driven or have more opportunities, and that is absolutely something that we would have the opportunity to maybe mesh. I would hate for us to start on a new initiative with sports without taking into consideration all the input that we're getting for the reimagining middle school. So we've got the opportunity, as Dr. Solomon is leading that charge, to incorporate athletics into what middle school is going to look like in the future in Brevard. I think we should maybe consider doing that together and not outside of that conversation.
I think that Ms. Sullivan definitely would even put that into part of the conversation and everything else. I just want to know, it's been said in here that it was due diligence done to say that they didn't want to go outside the county or none of this stuff. Let's just ask them. That's the only reason. Not saying that we're asking to change the policy or anything like that. We ask them, we can get it out, and it doesn't take that long. It's just an email out to our coaches saying, hey, in the event that we have an opportunity to travel outside the county, would that be something you want to do? Also, hey, and it's an email, and everybody can respond within a day. It's not moving heaven and earth. So I'm going to stick to my request. I would like to have that information sent to me. Absolutely, on the reimagining middle school, that should be a major component of it as we transition these people into their adulthood. They should have the ability to play sports, which they haven't for a little while in some of these things. So that's it. I'm good there.
So nothing else on this policy?
Not on that piece. Now I have the next one. So it says open enrollment policy, March deadline. So number 3, sorry, go down here.
Oh, I think you're on a different policy.
No, I'm not, but thank you. It talks in here about when an individual is the approval each student, EPOs, attendance at the end of the day.
H3.
Okay, H3 deals with the homeschool education, virtual students and wishing to participate in athletics. Just as a follow-up, it says policy 5121. So we're on H3, okay? And what that is it says that they have to follow the district's controlled open enrollment policy in 5121. Let me just ask this question to be square. The policy in 52121, I think, states that they have to follow it, that if they wanted to be a part of it, that they would have to apply the March the previous year. Here's the scenario I want to make sure is secure. If I'm a homeschool student, the beginning of the school year starts. Football tryouts are beginning. I would like to have the opportunity for homeschool students to be able at that time to make the decision to participate. It's in the actual statutes to allow them to participate, but the how is how it's defined. So I just want to make sure that if in February or something there's a sport that comes up like track and a homeschool student says, you know what, I want to participate in that the opportunity is afforded to that student to be able to do that. Does that make sense? I don't want them to have to have said, hey, you should have filled out this paperwork last year to try to play this year.
Yeah, I'd like the opportunity to review the statute and that policy.
Okay. All right. Okay. So currently under FHSAA or under the statutes, there is a rule that says that if athletic programs are not offered by another, by your school, that you're allowed to, under certain circumstances, participate at another school in that sports. So for instance, an Edgewood, under certain circumstances, could allow a participant to go play football at Merritt Island, something like that. Our policies and procedures inhibit that and don't allow that. I would like to bring forward an opportunity that if you don't play a sport at Edgewood that's not offered, that they would be able to go to the zone school that they're at to play that sport, as long as it doesn't inhibit the education of the school that they're in. And we have a lot of students that do not participate in the Edgewoods and don't do that because of that restrictive portion. That's all. There's a lot of students that would attend Edgewood and would further the school, but would like to play another sport. So, does that make sense?
What language are you speaking to in the policy? I'm sorry.
So this is just me adding it.
Oh, okay.
So we have, and it could fall into this because this is where we're talking about some of the other sports.
I'd like the opportunity to
Sure.
review what language you believe inhibits that, and then we can address that. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Mhm.
Why don't we just add then? I would like to add the opportunity and see if there's anything that restricts it to allow a student who's at, because this has come up at least every year since I've been on the school board, and in previous years it came to me, where a student is trying to, or a school, Edgewood is trying to start a baseball team or whatever, and they're told, no, we're not going to start a baseball team, or no, you can't play. And we have students that want to play outside, but they're not allowed to go play at another school or they're not allowed to do that. So I would like to give the opportunity for students that attend schools that do not participate. And I'll be honest with you, the volleyball is going to be the perfect example. So if you have volleyball that's only offered at certain schools, then students should be able to go play for another school if they don't, because beach volleyball might only be at 4 schools. But I might have a student that's up at Astronaut that's great at it. Or what about swim? Like there might be an opportunity where swim, they may not be able to have that opportunity. We should be able to allow them that and afford them that. I would like to do that, and if you can research to find out if, I know by law it's okay, but I want to make sure that there's no policies inhibiting it. That's all.
I don't know of any language prohibiting it or inhibiting it, but I will, I'll ask
Absolutely.
Dr. Ramjet to review.
Yep, I'm sure he'll do a great job.
I have a question.
Mhm.
So I want to be really clear. So let's say I'm at a school that has this,
Mhm.
and I don't make the team, darn. But there's another school who may have a team, and I just want to make sure that that's not going to happen, that, okay, I didn't make this team because I wasn't quite good enough, and so now I can go over to this school, but I'm sure we have a policy on that.
The FHSAA
Yeah,
would
you can.
prohibit that.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
idea is this, is that if I'm a student who is attending Melbourne High and they don't have a beach volleyball program, they don't have a swim program, something, say for
Like
instance,
Northern Ireland.
I would be able to go to another location to play that, and we would be able to afford that individual what they are, because they're stuck to play to their zone school. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a choice for athletics if it's not given to you. That's all. We can talk about it.
Can I just address just a couple things, Mr. Student, before you go through the rest of your list? I just have a couple concerns.
Sure.
One, I understand that these are things that need board discussion, but it would have been, I think, much more beneficial for Ms. Moore as well as the board for those questions to have been submitted to her 2 weeks ago when we got the agenda, so that she could do the research and we could have the discussion. Because now what's going to happen is the next time it comes to us, we can't make changes without it going back through the policy. This is our opportunity to make the changes. And I think we don't really have the information that we need to even opt to support the changes that you're requesting. So I think it's a disadvantage to you, certainly a disadvantage to Ms. Moore, who's been completely caught off guard by the questions, and a disadvantage to the board, who can't make a decision on it because we don't have the information that we need to give direction as a board, which is required for the policy change. The other thing that I would just ask is, as board members, the staff is Dr. Mullins's, and so I just want to make sure that we're sticking with the practice of asking Dr. Mullins to get the information instead of board members giving direction to his staff. I think that's important.
So I would definitely bring that up. There are some issues that are on here that I would like to get board direction on, but as I am feeling through that board direction, I'm noticing that there are comments that are made that are inhibitive towards that board direction, meaning it was commented that, look, these people have already been communicated to. Well, if they have, then that shouldn't be that hard of an issue to go ask those questions. I would also say that this is the only time that the public actually gets to see this. So a lot of these things are what is inside of many emails, many arguments, many things, even going back to Andy Ziegler when he was trying to get a lot of these things taken care of. And this is the only time that the public actually gets to see the will of the board, the people, and stuff like that. So with that, knowing that these are some of the questions, the last piece that you had mentioned is that we're not going to be able to look at it until it comes back. Listen, if we have to wait one more school board meeting to make sure that we craft policy that is good, then I would say that inhibits us. Whether I sent an email in, 15 emails in asking for information over the last 2 weeks, or if we did it here, there should be, I understand where we are sitting here saying, well, we should get all this information ahead of time, not have public discussion out in front of people, and then, you know what I mean, good. But I truly believe in these things, and I wanted to see where the board was on it, and then make requests based on that. I think it's within my right to do that, that's all. And
If I can just, I'm sorry, Mr. Susan, were you done? I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just
No, go
wanted to
ahead.
clarify.
Go ahead.
I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be discussing it. I'm suggesting that as your fellow board member, I feel bad that I don't have enough information to say, yes, that's a great idea, Mr. Susan, and we should move forward with that prior to the next meeting.
Right.
And so I'm not suggesting that there shouldn't have been discussion, but like Ms. Campbell sent out questions on many of the policies, asked them ahead of time. Staff had the opportunity to do the research, if necessary, get the information back to her. The entire board was able to read the response and have that information, so that when we came in to discuss that policy and the concerns Ms. Campbell had publicly, we were prepared for that discussion because we understood. So please don't think that I'm saying that you shouldn't be discussing it or that we shouldn't take the time to craft a good policy. I absolutely agree with you.
Right.
I just am saying it's very difficult when we don't have all of the information for us to be able to give you a thumbs up and say, yeah, the entire board thinks we should go that direction.
And I couldn't agree with you more. I am not asking you guys to make decisions hardline right now to try to make a decision in direction for October 25th. What I'm doing is in public, bringing up all of the different items so that the public understands where I stand and where we're going to be requesting information so that when it does come back that we can discuss it. At no time, and that's the reason at the beginning of it, did I ask, when's the next step? What are the next processes? So like right now, this is part of the beginning of this process. There's no rule that says that the first time we bring this up, that we have to not discuss it in the board and it has to take 3 meetings in order to do it. We can follow a different process sometimes and ask questions inside the public. So I appreciate that, and that is normally the way that we do business. But right now, this has been something that has been very near and dear to my heart for many years. And I want to try to bring it out and try to ask those questions now. So thank you. All right. It also talks in here about EKGs. I would like to know if there's an opportunity. Do you know how many? I would like to get information based on how many people opted out of the high school and middle school as opposed to opted in. Does that make sense to you? Because I would like to bring forward, and I don't know where any of the other board members sit on this, I would like to bring forward a recommendation to mandate the EKG policy for health screenings for who we play for. So I'm requesting that information, that I would like to find out how many opted out, and then I was going to ask the board what you guys thought about for making it a mandatory policy instead of going towards opt-out.
I mean, it couldn't opt out.
Right.
So somebody couldn't opt out?
No.
It would go completely against all of the new state law. Can't do that.
They do it in other districts. They mandate it.
This is a new law. That's just what we went over. There's no way we can get away with that.
Right. We don't.
I would tell you that I can't give you an answer to your question because we don't have.
No problem. Okay. Another.
Can I just clarify, there's lots of requests being made.
I'll follow
I
them
wanna
up at
be
the end,
res-
Dr. Mullins.
Okay.
I will.
I don't even know if we have that information, but I'll talk, I can follow up with Ms. Moore after the.
A couple of times we did. I've seen it before. Seen it come across. Intramurals. You had spoken about the middle school programs and then the intramural programs. Are we allowing those ones that we just put on, not the existing high school or the middle school programs, the intramural, are we allowing them to play other schools?
At this time, the definition, as I understand it, of intramural is it's within the school. It is school, it's kids of that school playing other kids of that school. We didn't set up any other events for them outside of that.
And the reason and that is the definition, right? The reason I asked is that many of the schools had the idea that they were going to move forward with, they thought that they were going to get a program where they could go compete against other schools, right? And some of them would like to compete against other schools. And so I would love to have the opportunity that at the end of these intramural programs, if there was a countywide, kind of like you do with the track and all those other ones, that we might be able to allow one-off competitions. And if the district does not feel comfortable with that, I would like to try to allow one of the outside vendors to hold championships between teams. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I understand what you said. Yes, sir.
So I guess the question would be in the board is that I would like to try to allow them to compete with each other. And we can talk about that on the 25th.
This policy is about scholastic athletics. Is anything outside of this?
Okay. All right, and then the last piece is that we've had some issues with press not being able to cover certain sports and everything else, and principals saying, you can't come in here, you know what I mean, and inhibit is, you and I went back and forth about our policy about, you said, hey, here's the policy, and then I read it, and then it was something that was not inconsistent with what we needed. This would be a good place to put in that any press that wishes to join or cover any of our games could be. Does that make sense to you?
It is in our media policy, and those administrative procedures, I just today, so this is not, they haven't been sitting on anybody's desk but in student services. The administrative procedures have been forwarded to Paul Gibbs. Mr. Gibbs is going to review them with Dr. Mullins. He'll have a chance to weigh in and decide whether he agrees with them or not, but that's covered in a different policy.
And that's to give open access for press to cover our sporting events and activities, correct?
I'm not going to use the word open because the policy is about 5 pages long, so I don't want to give anybody the wrong impression of what the word open means.
Okay, and that's going to be a procedure, not a policy?
It's a procedure. I'm sorry, I said the word policy. I meant procedure.
No, I was going to say...
It is
okay.
currently a procedure that we amended to make venues more open to the media. So I'll be happy to send you, I believe I can send you the draft. I don't think there's any issue.
But just to clarify, Mr. Susan, any administrative procedure aligns to a board policy. This one aligns to the media policy.
Correct.
In response to it.
We just have a policy that says that the principal's allowed to say no to somebody who comes into their school. And it's going to go against the procedure, which means that we would have to rewrite that policy. I would rather put it in policy so that it's where it was from the beginning. That's all. But we can talk about that later. I thought that this would be a good place to add it, but if you guys want to put it under the media, then that's all I have for this.
Any board member have anything else on policy 2431, interscholastic athletics? All right, then we are moving along to 3213, student supervision and welfare.
All right. This policy is encouraging students to discuss or facilitate a discussion of issues relating to a student's well-being with their parent or legal guardian. That's a staff person's encouraging that student to discuss or facilitate that discussion. It's notifying a parent or legal guardian if there's a change in a student's services or monitoring related to a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. It is preventing staff from prohibiting or discouraging notification of and involvement in critical decisions affecting a student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. And these revisions do encompass the suggested language of Neola.
Board members have questions or comments on this one?
Is that still being used? There was a debate. I had a debate with friends. Isn't that still something somewhere?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
Is MySpace gone for sure?
It's pretty dead.
Are you
It's
sure?
gone.
I'm looking it up right
Yeah,
now.
I don't think anybody
I don't
has
want a
MySpace
discrimination
anymore.
policy against MySpace.
It says et cetera.
Sure.
No one has questions. Ms. Moore, I do have just one question. It's just for clarification of our folks. The language in here says that an instructional staff member shall encourage a student to discuss issues relating to the student's well-being with the student's parent, legal guardian, or shall facilitate that discussion. Just for clarification, number one, there's nothing in this policy that says that our staff members cannot have conversations with our kids if they're seeking someone to talk.
There's nothing in the policy that prohibits that, no.
And is there this last portion that says, or shall facilitate the student's discussion of the issue with the parent, legal guardian? Is that, are our staff members expected to reach out to the parent, or are they supposed to help the student to coordinate discussion with the parent?
Yeah, so it's a complicated process, so I'll break it down. There's 2 words. There's sorry, the words just went out of my head. So I'm going to go back to the beginning. So if there's a change in mental health services, we must tell a parent. If a student comes to tell a parent whatever that change in mental health services is. If a student comes to us with a concern and shares the concern with us and we never see him again, and there's no need for follow-up and there's no need for continued service, there isn't the mandate that we have to discuss it with the parent. However, we should always reach out and say to a child, have you discussed this with the parent? Can I help you discuss this with the parent? If a parent directly calls us and asks us, is there something that my child has shared that they were concerned about, then we have the duty to disclose. However, we don't have, if we see something, if a child comes to us one time, we don't have to proactively reach out for everything that we see, because we would be reaching out all day, every day for every kid on the campus.
Right.
The only thing that can prohibit us from disclosing if there's been a change in service for a child is if we have knowledge that there's a safety concern for that child in the home, and then we have to the employee needs to discuss it. It's probably a school guidance counselor or social worker needs to talk to the principal. They have to come to agreement, and then they take notes and they move forward with the monitoring.
Okay, super, thanks.
In that last, that's something that involves staff, correct?
It doesn't necessarily involve DCF, and this is the point, is that DCF won't take a call of what might happen. They take calls of what do happen. So if in the conversation there's a past history of abuse, neglect, and or abandonment, we would absolutely call. If there's a fear of future abuse, neglect, or abandonment, DCF won't take the call. So that's why we have layers of conversations. Fact of the matter is, it's not just layers of conversation in the school. Dr. Sullivan and I have been part of those conversations where we work through those. So we take it very seriously.
Anyone else have anything else? All right, then our next policy is going to be 5200 attendance.
All right, the following items were added and or removed from the current policy. Additions: new reasons for excused absences, truancy procedures for home education, discipline section on tardies and truancy. Removed were the action on 3 unexcused absence, removal of the time limit for being considered present, removal of the attendance appeal process because it was moved over into procedures, the absence related to autism because that was part of procedures, college visits, married and pregnant students, all of those were in procedures. The proposed revision do encompass the suggested language from Neola, and all past practices that were not in the Neola have been moved over into the administrative procedures. We tried to clean this up to mirror Neola and moved over all of our extra Bavard stuff into administrative procedures.
Anyone have questions or comments on policy 5200 attendance?
I thought I'd walk not all of the questions that I had brought, but just a couple, just to clarify, because we received some concerns from community member, at least one, about some of this. The language in B5A, the new B5A, that talks about, there's a place where it says the parent may appeal to the board, and it's crossed out, says principal designee. That's not language we had in our former policy. All that blue is Neola, and then we made a Brevard adjustment. And I think that if I can summarize what you said was, this is hundreds of cases for our county, being large rather than just a handful of schools like some counties. And so this is to go through our normal procedure. And with the addition of truancy court, right, which we've been able to incorporate all of that into this as well, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then on K3, I don't even know if I asked this one. Oh, in the comments you guys had argued about the 9-day rule. I think that had to do with not attendance or things outside, that grades shouldn't be made up of things that are outside of academic performance, I guess.
Yeah, we typically want to only grade the things that evaluate their learning. Yeah.
You know, I was thinking through that because I totally agree. And, you know, you're tardy every day, so you fail this class, but you make hundreds on the test. That's not appropriate. But at the same time, there are certain courses where absence, absolutely, I'm thinking especially of the arts, that your participation not only affects your own learning, but it affects the whole, which, you know, for example, in a music class, the way you work together as a team, as a group, it's a standard that you have to learn. And if you're not in class, you're not learning that standard, you're not being assessed on that standard. And so in those kind of cases, I mean, it's kind of a different class. So, but we're just leaving this as it is and addressing it as the situations come up. I'm just not sure where that 9-day rule, I'm trying to figure out where, you know, what do we have to do to reconcile that?
Which one
And on K3, in the
Yes.
little, in the red line, you have a note. Somebody one could argue that our 9-day rule is not appropriate. I'm not sure whose that comment was.
I'm looking back
That
to
was-
Chris Reed.
You say that was you?
Can you come up to the mic?
So because that last sentence in that number 3 says, but his or her grade should be based upon what the student can demonstrate he or she has learned. So one could argue, in my opinion, in interpreting this, if I can count the class by doing the work and I miss 25 days, that statement says it should be based on, the grade should be based on what the student can demonstrate, not how frequently you came to class. So it, in my opinion, kind of contradicted. Now we've moved the 9 days out of policy and it will be in procedure, but
Okay.
again, student performance should dictate pass fail, but we do have an attendance criteria that will get moved to that policy that also will run in tandem with that now.
Which is not just ours. Those are state requirements. If you
Those are
want, right, so you can't miss that many days and still get credit from a school district in the state of Florida for passing that class.
Right, we have a statutory number of hours that equal a credit.
Right. So this goes directly to our FA. Right.
Yes.
This is, we're talking about our FA. Failure due to absences for, sorry, I should explain the abbreviations. Didn't I? Then the kindergarten question, and I know you're prepped for this one. So you have to attend 162 days, which, you know, being a math person, I'm like, that's 90%. Was it 90% or is it, Chris said something about hours. But kindergartners go 3 fewer days than everybody else. I don't know how the state, if that's how that all works. But so is this, so in other words, a kindergartner can only miss 18 days. No, actually not 18 days, 15 days.
18.
It's 18. But they only go 177 days. So how does that work?
So what was in the policy before and what's still in the policy is it suggested now is to be present for 162, whereas in the past it used to talk about how many you're allowed to miss. The rationale behind those numbers is there's an FTE statute, and then there's a rule that states that you must be in attendance for 720 hours as a kindergartner to be considered for promotion.
Okay.
That is 4 hours a day, is what that translates to. We, Brevard, choose to have a full-time kindergarten program. Therefore, we've added that 162 day to our policy to mirror that 9 per semester or 18 absences.
Okay.
So we could make a change because they go 3 days less. We could say it's 161 days in attendance or 660 and a half days of attendance. But the idea that piece is there because we have full-time kindergarten.
Okay. And later in the policy somewhere it says, talks about how long you have to be there to be counted as a day. I mean, are we getting down to the nitty-gritty of how many hours were you here at school, or but you were present some part of 162 days? I'm assuming if the parent was picking them up every day at noon, that would become a problem. But I mean, we're not getting down in general to the nitty-gritty of how many hours you were here.
This is really a response from instituting focus.
Okay.
Focus needed it to be a set amount of time. And when we mirrored it in policy, the set amount of time in some schools were 4 periods, in some schools was 5 periods, in some schools was 4 periods and a piece of lunch. So they're like, yeah, you need to give us a unit of time. And most districts around the state, it's 45, anywhere between 45 and 60 minutes.
Okay,
So,
that counts as a day?
yeah.
Okay. That's still a lot of flexibility. So thank you for answering that question.
Anyone else? Just one quick one for me, and this is more for our public. This whole idea of truancy and compulsory attendance, that we take on that burden because we are required to, correct?
Correct.
Like statutorily, we are required to report parents who don't send their children to school. It's not the district going after parents, right?
Yeah, correct, absolutely, 100%.
That's it.
Yep.
All right. Then we will move on to 5710, student and parent legal guardian complaint.
Thank you, Chris. Specific revisions include implement the provisions to provide parent and legal guardians the process to resolve concerns with the implementation of Florida Statute 1001.428C at their school. Just for you guys to grapple that is the provisions under 1557 that give the parents the opportunity, if they don't agree with the school's decision or the district's decision, to engage the services of a special magistrate through the state DOE. And so there's a process by which we go through. So that's what's outlined in 5710. These proposed revisions do encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Anyone have questions or concerns on this? All right. That was quick and easy. Then we will move on to 5751 parental. I don't think my script is correct.
Parental married status of students.
I have Mary's status of students.
That ain't
in
right.
in my
This one
script.
is so easy. There was a statute added to the policy. That was it. Do you have a question?
No, I had to look and go, where
There's
was the
nothing.
change?
There was a
There's
statute
nothing
added. Listen, we're trying to dot our I's and cross our T's. We're making work for ourselves.
And you added letters.
Did we add letter? Oh, yeah, we formatted it. You know, as we pull up really old policies that haven't been looked at in a while, the formatting's all off. So sometimes that's the hardest part of working with the policies.
Right.
So old it doesn't even have it.
All right. So no questions on 5751, right? Then we will move on to 5780, parent rights, students' rights.
Good afternoon. This policy is being revised to clarify the procedures regarding student health and other changes in compliance with Florida law. Particular areas of revision include notice of healthcare services, and these proposed revisions do encompass the suggested language from Neola.
Anyone have questions or comments on 5780? Ms. Campbell?
I had asked Ms. Moore if in C2, when we talk about education decisions, and this has to do with like custody issues that may come up, if in number one talks about parent guardians have the equal right to make decisions about the educational welfare of the student unless the school has received a certified copy of an enforceable court order that interprets whatever. And then number two, I think we need to it may be redundant, but reiterate that and in some way add the information, some statement about a court order. So where it says if the guardians cannot agree on a significant decision about the student's education or on matters and there is not a court order, then the school will take action based on what it considers to be in the best interest of the child. Like I said, it may be a little redundant, but I think we need that redundancy in there.
Do you have any concerns with that request?
No, I love that request.
I'm looking at you, but Russ, you presented it. Why do you own this?
Sorry.
You just tell me to show up. And it's student records. It's records.
Do you still have dryers in your office? Do
Ms.
you want to
Moore's
get away
been
from the
talking, so I
noise?
can give her voice to-
6 was the limit for any one cabinet member at a board work session, so we defaulted to broom.
I can make that change if the board wishes that.
Thank
No
you.
problem.
It would help us tremendously. I love that change.
Of course, Ms. Moore.
All right. Anything else on 5780, parent rights? All right. Then we will move on to 6520, payroll deduction. Ms. Lisinski, you have sat so patiently.
We're going to ask you 15 questions. Just kidding.
Is it working now?
Sure, Katie?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so the purpose of this revision
The purpose of the proposed revisions to the policy is to ensure compliance with all applicable federal and state laws, Florida State Board of Education rules, board policies, administrative rules, procedures, and guidelines. In addition, the proposed revisions promote transparency and accountability. Summary of the proposed policy revisions are: this policy is being revised for technical changes only regarding voluntary payroll deductions. This policy is being revised to clarify the procedures regarding legally required payroll deductions recommended by Neola. Particular areas of revision include the following: voluntary and legally required deductions for payroll purposes. These proposed revisions do encompass the suggested language of Neola. Are there any questions?
Anyone have questions? Mr. Susan?
Can you give me an example of what, like, currently why we needed to take the board away from approval from these payroll deductions in that line? You know what I mean? Because when I'm reading there, just give me one, because it may be, help me
Right,
understand.
so the way it read before you would have to approve all deductions. And so the way we revised it is, so any legal reductions we can do without board approval, like garnishments, child support, student loans, FRS, stuff that we have to do legally. The way it was written before was kind of vague, so this just shows you that you
Sure.
don't have to approve those things. We'll go ahead and make sure that we pay those things.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then the voluntary is things like United Way, union dues, those kind of things.
We would
that
have to approve.
You would have to.
Because they're
approve
negotiated
those.
and stuff like that. Okay, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you.
One question just for clarification, and I think I know the answer, but just to be sure. It says voluntary payroll deductions will be approved by the board and authorized in writing by the employee. So I'm assuming the board is going to authorize, like, overall, I'm not going to authorize that you have $10 taken out of your check for United Way. I'm going to authorize United Way deduction, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's categorical. So the board is authorizing voluntary deductions to be made, and then once the board authorizes that, it's up to the employees to sign off. And if it overwhelms the system, the superintendent can say, we're not doing it anymore.
So do we actually, we're doing a blanket approval of voluntary payroll deductions. You're not bringing individual categorical deductions to us for a vote.
It's possible if something new wants to get added, if it could come to the board in the future. Are we wanting to engage in this, payroll deduction process for this program?
Got it.
I'm thinking it says anytime that there's a applicable negotiated agreement, meaning that.
Yeah,
like, an
obviously, if
agreement
it's in a
comes up, we know
contract,
that
the contract with the unions are always approved by the board, so any deductions in there would be approved by the board. Yeah.
Usually, I think the one thing that concerned me, and the reason I was asking her was, how when we have our teachers get overpaid, and then all of a sudden they get a letter that says, you're going to be underpaid now, and we're going to garnish your wages. I used to like to fight that, and this is allowing them to just do that. But I can ask for those things if I want to go make a fight. You know what I mean? That was all.
I feel confident that with this phenomenal team, we're not going to have that issue anymore. All right.
Oh, I had one more comment. Michael Jordan didn't make his high school basketball team until he was a sophomore, and he did play in middle school.
Thank you for keeping this straight.
Yeah, but every one of those other guys did.
All right.
So sweetly.
Right. Anything else for the good of the order? Hearing no further business, this meeting is adjourned.